Hello, you multi-mandatory manufactural malts. I'm Ralphie here in the Bothy. I have just given you a malt mention thanks to Peter Ledachowski, who has provided the malt mention, which always happens when we're about to review a good quality spirit. You know, it's not one of these spirits you go up to a bar and you ask for in a tumbler with some ice, or you ask for it to be mixed with ginger beer or something. It's one of these kind of spirits where you sip it slowly on its own. If it's not a whiskey glass, at least in a wine glass, a concave wine glass, so that you can give it time to respect, acknowledge, engage and connect with the quality of what's being produced. Because when we do not acknowledge quality in our lives, malt mates, we do not really know what quality is. And look around you. Just look around you wherever you are, and you will see people who are very well off who don't have a great quality of life because they simply unthinkingly consume without pausing for consideration as to what it is that they're connecting with. So this is a channel for sippers. And what we're sipping today is 10-year-old Talisker. It's been a long time, malt mates. But before I go any further, this is Ralphie Review 982. That's 982. Not that long till Ralphie Review 1000. It's only a few months away now. My goodness. How time flies, and in the context of reviewing a Talisker 10-year-old. It was my first whisky review ever. Back in the beginning of this channel in February 2009. And it was a short review, one of the shortest I've ever done, at roughly about 3.5 minutes. So in other words, I didn't have much to say about it. I just got to the few basic tasting notes, banged out a malt mark, and that was the end of it. But we've moved on a bit since then. We're giving things more context, more substance in these reviews. It's not just about the malt marks, because malt marks are purely a perspective, an opinion, a point of reference, and they're a very personal thing. And we all have our own ways of marking, and we all reserve the right to adjust these marks over time as circumstances change around us. So I'll come back to that shortly, because there's a reason I made that statement. But here we are in Ralphie Review 982, and I've reviewed this whisky 4 times. This is the 4th time in 14 years. So I've not really connected with it very well. And the reason's simple. Talisker's been through a bad patch, in my opinion. It has been one of these brands which has suffered from very variable and intermittent quality issues. Whether it be the 10-year-old, whether it be the non-age statement Port Rouge or Storm editions, I've tasted them. Some I thought, actually, that's not bad. And others I thought, my goodness, how did they have the cheek to bottle that? It's dreadful. And then, of course, there's the Talisker 18, which I reviewed just before the price literally doubled overnight, which is remarkably undiplomatic and incredibly arrogant to literally double the price of your whisky overnight, simply because, you know, it's worth it. There should be increments there. So I regard Talisker as, it's widely available, it's easily recognised, but for me, it's a variable and tainted brand. But on this channel, I've got to balance out my reviews and review whiskies which I wouldn't normally buy. And I have to say, folk, I've been shocked by this. This is actually really decent quality. I did not expect this to be as good as it is. On the nose, distinctly phenolic. cleanly phenolic, not so much the Islay phenolics where it's all upfront peatiness. This is more sort of ashy, smoky, more kind of savoury type spicy peatiness. And it comes across in the whisky quite well. The finish cuts off a little bit. And I get the impression, purely from my experience, that this is a whisky that it could deliver more if the resources were put into it, but it doesn't. It fulfills the market expectations, so we leave it at that. Taste-wise, plenty of barley sugar strutting about there, and a good bit of what's called peat reek. So there's quite a definitive nippy but clean, bold phenolic signature, which has been a little bit off key in previous Taliskers in recent years. But I'm coming from this perspective of someone that was drinking Talisker back in the 1990s, when it was actually an amazing whisky and was far more integrated and frankly had a different flavour than it has now, because the calibre of casks, the proportion of fresh casks used in its composition were far more dominant, which is why in the old days, and particularly if you look at auctions, you'll find Talisker bottled at 5 years old and 8 years old, and in fact it's a wonderfully matured and highly sought after single malt whisky, and deservedly so. But you know, times change, and inevitably owners change the way they do things without really telling us. So when you're chasing higher yields, more alcohol out your grain and resulting in a bit less flavour, you know, there's always a compromise along the line. And so long as you've got a very visible brand where the majority of people are not really going to pick up on it, on the fine detail, then you're going to get away with it. But let's come back to the fact that this is better than I thought it was going to be. I bought this with trepidation, put it that way. But I have been mildly surprised. I'll give it another wee sip neat, give you a few more tasting notes on it before I add some water. This is bottled, by the way, at 45.8%. I've no idea why they didn't just round it off, you know, add the extra 0.2% and bottle at 46%. But this is just the eccentricities of producers who'll have some, you know, bizarre reason for it. You know, some it's custom practice, tradition. Our master blender says this is the pitch perfect strength, that this is the finest expression at this strength, and it's all baloney. I mean, there's a general truth in that if you've got a particularly high strength alcohol and you bring it down a little bit in strength, you will start to kick out more flavour and reduce the alcoholic nip, particularly in cask strength whiskies. But 0.2%, you know, that's nonsense. But taste, quite sharp in the arrival. It's definitely going to benefit from water. Grapefruit oil, ginger, raw phenolics, surprisingly raw phenolics. I didn't expect that. Quite interesting actually, but as a 10-year-old whisky it tastes more like an 8-year-old whisky. So I'm going to add some water now. Let's kick out some of the flavours, which happens when we dilute the whisky. And of course, as you know, when a whisky is diluted already, pre-diluted down to 40% from, say, cask strength, flavour is lost. Flavour is lost into the atmosphere in the vats, and you never recover it. So when you get a 40% whisky, you're getting simply, with the presence of less alcohol, you're getting less flavour each and every time without exception. So that applies for every single malt out there. In fact, every single spirit. So I've added some water. You'll probably note that looks pretty well fake tanned, a little bit of tango tan there, which is one of the customary trademarks of the producers Diageo. If if it pours out a cask, put some artificial colouring in it. Yeah, and don't let them kid you it's natural. It's not. It's made in a laboratory, it's made in a factory, and it's done using chemicals. It's done artificial. It's artificial colour. Right. There are worse ones, but hey, they're not giving you an honest reading of this single malt. And it's worth commenting and passing. I've mentioned it before briefly, but one reason that the producers add caramel to a spirit is to compensate for the lack of colour that came out of casks that were in fact inactive. So it's one of the signs of inactive casks or less active casks or less prominent or less active maturation is when you see quite a lot of caramel used to kind of bolster up the appearance, the superficial appearance of the beverage. Back to the nose. A little bit more smoky coming out now. A little bit more wood fire and a little bit more barley sugar coming from the remainder of the malt. Big improvement in the arrival. I've added just short of 5 millilitres of water, and the phenolics themselves are becoming more articulate. They're not just a fudged jumble of phenolic, peaty twigginess. The harshness subdues slightly due to the addition of water, and then we're seeing the other components, the natural toffee, heavy malt notes that you get from Talisker, that grapefruit oil that I mentioned briefly previously, and a little bit of gingeriness, definitely, it's a component of Talisker. And we're moving into the finish, which used to be much more prominent jasmine tea notes and a little bit of fresh, zesty tannins. But we're not seeing that here. The finish is basically receding phenolics. So it's not what it used to be. If you have the money, if you have the budget, and if you have the inclination, excuse me, just kicking my bucket there, I highly recommend, if you've got access to a whisky auction, or even a general auction that occasionally sells whisky, if it's not too expensive, buy an old bottle of Talisker and put it side by side with a new one. This is something I'll be doing later in the year with some Johnnie Walker Green Label, and see the difference. It'll blow your socks off, it really will. Because it's part of the timeline of whisky. We notice it because it's a different culture now. We just notice how things are changing with individual brands over time. Now, I think I want to highlight to you before I wind things up and give you a malt mark is that I poured a glass last night and I decided not to finish it because I expect Talisker to be chill filtered, heavily chill filtered, absolutely to chill filtered within an inch of its life. But here it is, the same dram poured yesterday and the one I've just poured today. You can distinctly see the difference. The Talisker from yesterday evening, so that's 24 hours ago, is distinctly Scotch misted. I'm surprised at that. For a company that routinely chill filters everything they produce without a pause and without a shred of guilt, this has been partially, probably filtered without the chill being on, to be honest, but there's a distinctive Scotch mist in that glass. "24 hours later, because I've left enough whisky in the glass with water to keep it alive for that length of time. It's a really much improved whisky, much more syrupy, soft, dry syrup notes. There's a richness here that I've not tasted in Talisker for many, many years. Hence the reason that I've avoided it. So I've got no explanation for that. All I can presume is that someone at the bottling plant made a mistake and forgot to switch the chill filtration button on, as a result of which a batch of Talisker has gone through the system relatively intact. And with this bottling, I've really got lucky. There we go. It says made by the sea. It says made by the sea on the front of the label and made by the sea in the back of the label. So what the producers want you to know is that it's been made by the sea. Right. Now, the reason they're doing this is to give some sort of explanation, vague and generalised, as to what you're tasting. So what you've got to think is cascading Atlantic salty swells, seashores and seagulls flying about, squawking, and crashing waves and brininess and seaweed and all these naturalistic things. But I think it's worth pointing out that although the new make spirit at Talisker Distillery is in fact made by the sea, genuinely, the majority of Talisker, although they have warehouses there, is matured just outside of Perth in the centre of Scotland. So when it says made by the sea, the new make spirit is made by the sea. However, the actual whisky itself, because whisky is made in warehouses, is probably not made by the sea. But this is the kind of economy with the truth that is widely tolerated within the Scotch whisky industry. In fact, the more I think about it, all drinks industries around the world, they really cut themselves quite a bit of slack. The issue is, they're not telling lies. But to people who really know the backstory of a brand, when you get this disingenuous messaging, it comes across as quite patronising, which is exactly what it is. Anyway, enough of my grumpiness. I'm just telling it as it is. It's a personal journey. I'm not trying to kid on that I'm some world's authority. And I think this is far more important than listening to an expert. You listen to someone that's just been around whisky for a really long time and that remembers, that has that timeline that goes back to the 1990s, that remembers when Talisker really was an outstanding signature, that it was more famous than most of the distilleries in Islay for its peatiness. It was up there with Highland Park. Without a doubt. But these really old, vintage and veteran Taliskers, they're highly sought after now by collectors for good reason. And this, unfortunately, is why you come across quite a lot of fakes. So buyer beware, buyer take care. Now, just to conclude, when I first reviewed this single malt 14 years ago on this channel, review number 1, I was impressed with it. I gave it 89 out of 100. However, when I reviewed it for the second time round in 2013, so over 4 years later, in May 2013, in review 361, I chopped the mark down to 86%. And then when I reviewed it most recently, prior to this review, the 10-year-old, it was in review 694. In November 2017, so just under 6 years ago, and I gave it 81 out of 100 because it was really, really heavily processed and I'd lost a lot of character. And I knew I'd lost a character because I remember when I had a lot of character. So what I'm going to give it this time, because I've been getting a lot of mixed messages here, starting with what I create, and that is, even as I was buying this, I was buying it with some regret, wondering what I was letting myself in for. So we tend to buy with preconceived ideas. And this has pleasantly surprised me. So I'm going to give this, marks are improving here. The last mark was 81 out of 100. But I'm going to jump it up to 82 out of 100 because I'm getting evidence that this hasn't been chill filtered. So hey, it's definitely worth an extra mark for that. So I hope you've enjoyed this review. If you pop back for Alfie Review 982 Extras, which is coming along very, very shortly on this channel, I'll be talking about malt marks I'll be talking about why I give malt marks, how I assess my malt marks, why you don't agree at times with my malt marks, and why that's absolutely fine and that's okay, and why, of course, for a number of you subscribers in particular, are wondering why I've really brought the marks down recently. And there's a specific reason for that, above and beyond the reasons that I've already given. So I hope you'll join me for that. I'm Ralphie in the Bothy, and this has been a malt moment. I hope you've enjoyed sharing it with me, and I hope, by the way, I hope that malt you've been sipping, that you have been enjoying as well. But don't drink too much.